This is the 5th day of the May 91 7-day retreat at Springwater. Here are some of the new questions. It is good to be reminded again and again, to hear over and over again, that it is okay to let whatever thoughts or emotions come up, to be there without controlling them or having to feel bad about them or trying to get rid of them. Just to see it all as it is. Hearing this again and again is very helpful. While waiting for a meeting, I could just see clearly how I was literally elevating you into a position of authority, my authority, turning power over to you. Sitting there, I saw that it reminded me of going in to see the dean or the professor or the expert or the authority. And I was seeing that I was creating all that from the past. Just seeing that was a relief. I also realized that I do it so that I can turn things over to you in order not to have to take responsibility myself. I have had a practice of working on impermanence, which means seeing how every feeling, every thought, sensation, emotion comes and goes again. I'm wondering whether there is any conflict between this practice and what you do of just listening, what we're doing here, just listening. Is that in conflict with it? I'd never before realized how deep listening goes. Coming here to retreat, just sitting in meditation, thoughts bother me less and less. They're just coming and going. But I find that listening to a talk by Toni about questioning gets me all involved intellectually, and I'm filled with thoughts. What does it really mean just to let thoughts come and go without bothering about them? Most thoughts engage the body and mind mentally, physically, emotionally, and one gets very deeply caught up in it. And with all the consequences of not being here, being attentive. Doesn't it need a state of quiet attention to even see a thought or feeling? And isn't it this quiet seeing that lets go, or that is the letting go? Are we responsible for our thoughts? Can we decide to stop addictive behavior? How do we make decisions? Yesterday, during the talk, you mentioned that you do not talk so much about that we all have a true nature, or about wholeness or perfection, but that you rather look at all the blockages that keep us separate and divided. That bothered me somewhat, and I've been wondering whether the looking at blockages like anger, fear, sadness, which you do so much in talks, can lead to a constant self-examination without end. In the past, when I used to do work with concentration, I remember often coming upon blockages. without exactly knowing what they were and how to label them. I wonder if one could just become too involved in looking for all these blocking things. In looking for them. Where do we begin? Two things stand out to this mind that ask for clarification. The one about sitting more and more quietly in meditation and then listening to a talk and the botheration of new thoughts coming up, questions, and the intellect getting involved, which of course the implication is the end of that quiet sitting, meditative sitting. And the other is this letting thoughts just come and go. What does it mean? And also, does looking at things here together in a talk, like fear or anger, get us all involved in constant eternal self-examination and the imprisonment of that? Actually, in saying that yesterday, it is not just looking at blockages we're looking at how this mind and body work, how they operate, to become aware of it or allow light being shed on it. This is what most of these talks, I think, are about. In looking around on the news, reading the paper, or seeing what happens in our own streets. Somebody just telling me during a retreat that right before their house a murder was committed, someone was stabbed to death. And on the market parking lot where she was shopping, somebody slit someone else's throat. Right in the neighborhood, right in front of one's house. And the fear, the anxiety about even going out anymore. And of course, on the news, the elation of a successful war and the tragedy of a million or millions of people fleeing with nothing or hardly anything into the mountains, polluting the water that they're drinking, the famines, the floods wiping out hundreds of thousands of people, and those left over, their hunger. Not just hunger. One helicopter pilot didn't dare land for fear he would be torn apart before he could deliver the goods. That's what we turn into when we're hungry. Wild. Ruthless, not necessarily, but very often. And seeing by also watching oneself closely the blindness in which we react most of the time, the automaticness, the conditionedness. We have many words for it. The just tapes or programs playing and directing us like a puppet on strings. Becoming aware of that. Doesn't one wonder why this is so and whether this has to be so? What is going on? Can it be seen, brought to light, not just happen darkly, dimly, automatically? confounding us in our relationships with each other. Making us attack each other, kill each other, be insensitive to each other, what we feel, insensitive to ourselves, what we feel. How does this all operate? Not just in the past, reading about case histories, maybe my own case history, but catching it as it happens. Is that possible for a human being? Or catching it as it has just happened, or as it happened a while ago. The memory is still very fresh. And someone says, yes, it is possible. There is this capacity in human beings. Beside thinking and image projection and acting out of programs, which is a great capacity of this body, to be programmed to do almost anything. Beside that great capacity to be programmed and act for the rest of one's life out of conditioned programs. In spite of that, there's also the capacity to see what we're doing, to have insight into it, to become aware of it, be attentive to it. See, all of these words are very similarly expressing something that is other than automatic behavior, which is very much supported by our whole thinking process. I think we have this ability, the brain has the ability to compartmentalize so much that one can be in one compartment and not know what happens in the others. Live consumed with a personal problem and become oblivious to the problems that happen around one, to people farther away or close by. This is maybe what this person was bothered by or concerned about, that we get so caught up in our own problems, endlessly self-examining ourselves, that we get in a rut with it, in a cage, in a prison. But this is not what this work is all about. And if it is understood this way to be, I have to put it better, clearer. Don't we always say, don't just look at yourself, but listen also to the birds. See the clouds and feel the hot or cool air, and aware of the people around one. Someone sitting right next to one, maybe chewing noisily. I've tried, meanwhile, to chew celery quietly. It's very difficult. And can become embarrassing. But we don't want to serve blended salads only. I'm not making fun of the person who was saying that. We all go through that, feeling invaded in our space at times, because we already have created this idea of my space. And it's nice if someone is considerate who sits down next to one. So, don't we talk about an open awareness that is not exclusively focusing on my thoughts, my feelings? My thoughts and my feelings are not my thoughts and my feelings. That's already a misnomer. They are thoughts and feelings that inundate human beings the world over. Somebody said, thinking the same thoughts as others is like catching a virus. A very good analogy. Thought waves go through people, through nations, like the thought wave of patriotism being caught here as a virus in this country, maybe in other countries as well. One country in this century, and another country in another century, or maybe closer together. So it's not my thoughts I'm observing, and it's so good to realize that, to change the words even, because words are powerful, and to realize one is observing thoughts and feelings in a human being who is quite representative of other human beings. So in studying or understanding oneself, and by studying I don't mean just intellectually collecting data and committing them to memory for future use, but to see in action how we act and react and think, and the consequences of our thoughts and words on others, on ourselves, the impact we exert, all of that, to observe the whole thing. That is not, I wouldn't call that just self-examination. It is shedding light on how a human being functions in great disorder and chaos most of the time. Not all the time. We're not trying to put down ourselves. That's part of the chaos, part of the confusion and dis-ease, to put down what one sees, my thoughts, my feelings. And then comes a reaction, I want to have some boost again. Elevate, feel elevated by someone. And it's understandable that if one is sitting quietly without a problem, open, a feeling of what? Nothing there? Empty? Empty of self-concern? Then a problem or something is mentioned in the talk. Why does that disturb? Or why does that incite the intellect to start operating? Because this is how we first try to tackle problems since the day we were born almost, not quite that early. Certainly from the day we went to school, we were steeped in problem solving. We had to take problems home too, to solve them at home. And that was a training of the intellect. The moment a problem is found or mentioned to us, the intellect gets going because it thinks it is the only tool capable of solving problems. It's a deep ingrained habit by now to start thinking out a problem and thinking how will it work and project the future. And well, I don't have to explain it, all I can. Each one can observe it. But in asking to look at how this mind works, how the intellect starts to tackle a problem that has been mentioned, there can be more than thinking about it, there can be a seeing of it. And seeing, that's the beauty of it, is never disturbing. Even what it shows up is that one has just placed somebody in a position of authority, ready to give power to this person, turn one's responsibility over to her. If that's seen, the seeing is the important thing. And then something can change, and what goes on so habitually in this body and mind, it does change with the seeing. At least one questions what one is doing, wonders about it, and begins to observe it more as it happens so automatically until one begins to have an insight into it. The intention of a talk is not to stimulate the intellect, but to kindle a looking, a mutual looking, a looking together at what ails us human beings in our relationship, in our life, on this beautiful, twittering, flowering earth. Several people in this retreat have brought up whether maybe one has created for oneself an artificial meditation space, which is possible. One can control thought, with method and practice. One person mentioning that after years and years and years of having dropped a koan which was inaudibly voiced on the exhalation and inhalation, still waking up to the fact that some use of a sound is going on, inhalation, exhalation, using the vibrations of a sound to create a thought-free space. Which is a great relief to us, so burdened with thoughts all the time and their impingement on the organism. Every thought, we say many times, has access to every gland, muscle, and organ in this organism, to disturb it, to get it going, to propel it into action. So to create a space where thought is under control is a great relief. And this is what one may feel and think and hope that meditation is. More and more of this space to pervade one's life. Only it never quite succeeds once one leaves a place like this. And this may be a disturbing question if one is attached to such a state. Who is the one that is attached to it? Who is the creator of this or the enjoyer of this state? We're not asking it in order to give a spiritual question to work on, but to look at what's going on is because the mind deceives itself that it has arrived or is experiencing something. But who is the experiencer? The one who clings to this. Isn't that also thought? My accomplishment or my space? And the division, the duality of that. Me who has it, who creates it, who enjoys it, and what it is that is being enjoyed and created. And in that there is conflict and potential sorrow. The sorrow of not understanding. When something happens that disturbs, and frustration arising, maybe violence, anger. But for a talk which lasts maybe 50 minutes, we raise questions and look at things. The rest of the day is up to each one of us. And one doesn't have to come to a talk if one finds it's too disturbing, too intellectualizing or so. We're free to come or not come. And maybe a talk would be more inspirational or enjoyable if one heard a lot about the true self. That we all are, or all have, or whatever. I've forgotten the way to put these things in this way. And actually, sometimes in talking about wholeness, because it's never completely absent, is it? It's operating and put into words at times, expressed. Then someone gets angry with me and says, "Don't talk to me about wholeness. Talk about the misery that I'm in." And one can understand that too. Don't paint pies in the sky. There's no help. What is help is to look at what grips or grabs this body, mind. To shed some light on that is what is needed, not to hear about beautiful states that other people have. So what is one going to do? Do what one needs to do. The talks don't come out of the blue sky. They come from living together here and also meeting with people outside of retreat, meeting up with oneself. When a problem arises, an irritation takes place, a fear comes up, or a sadness, and wondering about it, not condemning it. Like yesterday in one of our group meetings, one person said, "But why is it that one can be clear, or there can be clarity at one moment, so clear that there is clearly no one here to be hurt or to be afraid? There's no one there, it's just openness. And the next moment be hurt and afraid again. How is that possible?" And it wasn't asking for an explanation, for an intellectual research project, but wondering about it and maybe seeing it happen, the flip over, although the flip over happens, and then one sees what has happened. Or can there be a sustained awareness that a stimulus that would irritate one or scare one fails to make the connection with the organ or the muscle or the gland, because there is awareness that can happen too. That is a marvelous revelation of how the mind can work. That a stimulus almost to trigger, one can almost feel what is about to jump into action, does not quite make it, because it's seen. And in the seeing, it doesn't have to run its habitual course. Can't explain it. It's a miraculous thing, but it works that way. So can we jump from there to this question which I was asked twice now? How does one make a decision? Or can we decide to stop addictive behavior? Let's first be clear that we all understand the same thing when we use the words addictive behavior. Normally an addiction the word is used to describe someone who has to take drugs, shoot heroin, has to drink, has to smoke. Workaholic, the word has come up, has to work. There's no choice there. The whole organism and mind drives one. And for these well-known addictions, there are clinics or groups, support groups, which often are amazingly successful. Many people talk to me about the success of a support group in stopping an addictive behavior. How has one decided to stop it? Does it come out of the same question we mentioned a moment ago, seeing the hurtfulness of getting hurt or hurting others, destroying oneself, destroying others, seeing that, having some direct contact, not rationalizing it away, not denying it anymore. And how that happens already, who knows, that one stops denying and begins to see what one is doing. There are things that happen in us that we can't all explain, but they do happen. But addictive behavior isn't just these gross things like drinking or shooting heroin, smoking, chain smoking, or chain working. We're finding out, aren't we, in observing what goes on in us, that thoughts are addictively running all the time, or almost all the time. Addicted to positive thoughts, addicted to negative thoughts, and to what they elicit in the body. Addiction meaning it runs and it seems one has no control over it. Can one decide to stop that? See, I must stop that can become part of the addiction. Addictive thought, I must stop it. I must stop judging. One person told me how the thoughts are running, finding there's a judgment. I must stop judging. And then the thought, I must stop judging judgment. And an infinite amount. It was just crazy. Biting fingernails, drumming with the hands, moving back and forth, or the way where we put our hands going over our mouth or scratching our heads. We're not even aware of it most of the time, scratching, not aware of it. Isn't that always the first step, to become aware of it and not immediately rationalize it and say, well, that's human nature, but wonder about it. Why am I doing that? And to watch it in an interested, friendly way, and not already threatening to stop this, to cut it off. Then one needs to bite one's finger some more because of the severity of the resolution or the admonishment, which is ancient tape. You shouldn't be doing that. You ought to know better. You should take a responsibility for yourself, and all of this stuff that we have interjected from commands from our parents and teachers and so forth, which make us nervous in the first place to do all these addictive things that we're doing. So can there be an open, friendly interest if one is addicted to chewing fingernails or cuticles, or putting the hand over the mouth all the time, or whatever one may be doing? Aware of it, and then watch it. Watch it as wholesomely as is possible. What is going on that makes one do that? And one may not find anything. It may be so habitual that the fingers just seek out each other. The hand goes to the mouth. It's the habit in itself is the addiction. When it's happened so often, so the likelihood of its happening again is enormous. But maybe it's also a state of nervousness over something. And to watch in a different way, not just watch the process going on, lifting the hand, biting the nail, or whatever it is one is biting, but also experiment with it. At the moment of noticing that one is about to do it or doing it, can one be free not to do it and watch what happens? Not out of a prohibition or control, but out of interest. What happens if I'm watching and not doing this? Just what is the state of the mind now? And one may feel the frustration wanting to do this. It happens in sitting when something itches. And particularly if one, as some of us were, is in a very strict environment where you're not allowed to move, to scratch an itch. An amazing discovery happens that without doing anything, and the whole system is go to scratch, but it can't. The itch goes away. It sounds very simplistic, but it's an amazing discovery. That if a stimulus is not responded to in a habitual way, the habit is held in abeyance by attention, watching, interest. The stimulus may die, wither away. And with that, the response too. But that can only happen if there is attention, awareness, and an interest to find out what happens when I don't go along with it, and to examine or feel the pining organism, pining for fulfillment of the habitual kind. And I don't talk about masochism here, or trying to keep oneself dangling for. It's none of that. One is concerned with the addiction in the first place. Wonders about it, would like to be rid of it, and doesn't know how. Nothing one has done has worked. Can one be free to experiment with it? And as one is aware of it, not going with it. And then see what happens in a friendly, gentle way. Not in order to do violence or punishment to oneself, but to find out. This question which came up in the group meeting, but also outside of group meetings, what does it mean to let thoughts come and go without bothering about them? It sounds beautiful, and everyone would like to be in that state. Not to want that state. Strive for it, then controlling mechanisms will come into play. Is there such a state where thoughts come and go, feelings come and go? Or can one say over the long run of a week, many thoughts have come, many thoughts have gone, many emotions have been there, many emotions have withered away. This is how it happens. And as this person said, this is what is impermanence. This is what I'm working on, to see the impermanence of any one state, no matter how gripping it is. Eventually, it's gone, but has given way to another state, another loop of thoughts. Hasn't it? Or not? Another bunch of feelings and emotions. The impermanence of specific thoughts and feelings and emotions. And yet, the repetitiveness of them, too. the thought that came and went this morning is back there in the afternoon, or maybe an hour later, or maybe the next minute already, in a new disguise? Or is there something else operating? Not just thoughts coming and going, feelings coming and going, but something of a stable or sustained awareness, not over days and weeks, but for moments or more than a few moments. In that state, thoughts don't get one involved, as the person says. Thoughts get us involved, caught up, and then if one becomes angry or afraid, there are consequences to that which are more involving. But if there's a state of looking and seeing or listening to that, then thoughts and emotions don't have that deep grip. They loosen up because something else is going on. A looking which is not judgmental, not fighting, not opposing, because that's what awareness is. It does not fight or want to bring about something else. It just sheds light, brings clarity to what is actually happening without finding fault with it. And then the emotions or thoughts don't need to dig in order to support themselves, because that's what happens. If we fight something, we give it strength to continue, maybe subversively. And then the question that was asked, is this practice of working on impermanence, seeing the impermanence of thoughts and feelings and emotions, is that compatible or incompatible with just listening to what's happening? It all depends. If this practice on impermanence involves philosophical reflections about the impermanence of all life, including my thoughts and feelings, then there's no open listening. There is occupation with thoughts about impermanence. You know, actually when a thought is there and gone, either it's there or it's gone. If one doesn't begin to reflect about oneself, one can't even say it went, because now is something different. You have to remember that there was a thought in order to say that thought has gone. So does the practice on impermanence involve reflection upon it? We're not saying it's wrong, but it is an intellectual occupation which involves memory and thinking about what is happening in a time mode. Whereas just listening to what's there needs no time mode. It's just what's there now. And remembering what was there before, one says, well, it's not there anymore. But that's memory operating. And that can also be listened to as memory. The openness of being, of seeing what's there, being with what is there, whether it is an emotion or nothing, is not incompatible with listening. It's the same thing. Listening, looking, feeling, sensing is all one whole perception. The senses are not as separate as we believe they are. They seem to be coming out of one source of perception, which is whole. it is thinking and labeling that begins to separate and divide and compartmentalize. So that we think when we look at something we can't hear, and when we hear something we can't look. But I think one notices here that feeling, sensing, hearing, listening, seeing, it's all one whole process, isn't it? And if that process is whole, then a thought coming in is heard and seen and doesn't begin to grip this whole organism. Because it's heard and seen. And therefore may not make its habitual connection with emotions. When we begin to get deeply involved in emotions, that wholeness of perception may not be there anymore. Does this now talking, I've been talking again for quite a while, is one now engaged in thinking about it, or just listening and looking, or maybe a mixture of both? Somebody asked, what is that sound that almost sounds like a duck? And I said, it's frogs, but I'm not so sure. And can one listen to it without knowing what exactly it is? It would be nice to know there are some ducks up there breeding eggs, and the mind can imagine it, envision it. But it can also listen quietly, at ease, not needing to know what everything is. And feeling the urge to know, that's an addiction, isn't it? That's not said judgmentally, just meaning a great habituation to it and satisfaction from the results of knowledge. But open listening and feeling, sensing, whatever is all involved, does that need further satisfaction or fulfillment? It's just there, isn't it? And if something within pressures or hurts, can that be there like a quack, 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 quack? Not denied, not repressed, not made into a thing. There with everything else, as it is, this instant. We will end here for today.